in the effort to not be doing any damage to parrots and to be understood, I call them probabilistic mimics. But now that you've said probably machines, I think I'm going to steal that.
Nice.
Ooh. Maybe I'll go down in history as the guy that labeled the thing.
The bot brothers.
Welcome to the show. This is the Bot Brothers AI for Educators. I'm Mike Pearson.
I'm Pat Burns.
We have I want to say a super special guest star on our show. We've got distinguished Professor Lauren Goodlad out of Rutgers. I know Professor Goodlad that you did a stint at University of Illinois, so shout out to the Midwest.
ILL.
Yeah, and Pat is also a graduate, so he was super excited. I went to NIU, so we have fights because in Illinois, U of I is the better school, and I'm just a satellite, whatever, small state school, wah, wah, wah. Wish I had great professors though, so I don't care. So we're happy to have you on the show. You've got quite the vita, quite the resume. I think I'm just going to let you fill the stuff in. I know you're a distinguished professor. I'm kind of guessing on what, but maybe it might be easier just to have you fill in your area of expertise.
Thanks for that very generous introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be in dialogue with people from the great state of Illinois.
There we go.
Yes. So I am Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Literature. My field is the Victorian era, literature and culture. And what initially got me interested in the topic of artificial intelligence, so-called, was that I like to work on history from what is called the longue durée. In other words, how it relates to the present day. And I started to do some work on the history of statistics and realized that a lot of the really basic innovations in statistical reasoning came about in the Victorian period, primarily by people who were involved in eugenics and other things that are now thought of as pseudoscientific, through devices that today would be thought of as, roughly speaking, linear regression. In other words, bell curves. And that is, to this day, linear regression is something that machine learning technologies use, only they have become a lot more multi-layered and sophisticated. So instead of thinking of it in terms, if we're talking about something like a large language model, instead of thinking of one of the big ones as a big bell curve, you might think of it as something that has a lot of parameters, perhaps as many as 1 trillion parameters, every single one of which has a kind of classifier that operates like a bell curve. Because these systems are predictive, they are fundamentally predictive analytics. And predictive analytics is always probabilistic. And that way of reasoning about the world is a late 19th century innovation.
It's so steampunk then, isn't it? It's
Yeah, that's a great way to think of it. We should do a graphic novel.
Yeah, that is, yeah, right. That is for the most detailed explanation I've heard. I think because of what my area is just English, and I'm a high school teacher. I think of the large language models as I call them probably machines, right? Like you're probably you prompt it, and you're probably going to get something that resembles something like what you're looking for, probably.
I like that. Probably machines is exactly right. I tend to call them probabilistic mimics, which is my own way of parsing the more technical term stochastic parrot that you may have heard from the research of Emily Bender, Timnit Jabru, and colleagues. This is a really important paper that came out in 2021 on the dangers of large language models. and it called it Stochastic Parrots. And while the paper is super important, and it had, you know, it had the effect of actually bringing to light how much Google in this instance wanted to suppress its findings, because they actually fired two of the researchers that were involved in writing the paper, and others had to withdraw their name from the paper so as not to be fired. While all of that is super important, I tend to veer away from the term stochastic parrot, because nobody knows what stochastic means.
Right.
Actually just simply means seemingly random and unpredictable. Although there is so much data in these models that it finds patterns despite that seemingly random and unpredictable nature of language. And I also want to avoid the word parrot, which linguists use as a way of saying to utter something unmeaningfully, because parrots are actually really smart animals, as we're beginning to discover. So in the effort to not be doing any damage to parrots and to be understood, I call them probabilistic mimics. But now that you've said probably machines, I think I'm going to steal that.
Nice.
Ooh. Maybe I'll go down in history as the guy that labeled the thing like the.
Well, and now we have record of it right here. It's
I know,
proof.
right?
So that's a good deal. Good deal.
First coined by Mike Pearson, 2023 on a podcast. A little footnote, my claim to fame.
Time for us to go viral.
Right.
There we go.
I want to come back to the kind of the language problem with stochastic parrot. But before I get there, unless Pat, you have any questions?
Oh, real quickly, and granted, my source, and I'm embarrassed to say this in front of a professor, no less, because I had not heard that phrase either. So I started looking up as you're like explaining that, and I'm like, oh, that's how you spell it. Stochastic. And it's apparently the term was coined by Emily M. Bender. So, Mike, I apologize to you. I don't know why I'm apologizing to you, but you can't coin it. It's been coined. Or no, probably you said that. That's bad. Stochastic parrot is hers.
Stochastic parrot has definitely been coined by Emily Bender and her team, though, if I could add, just to add rampant sexism to the problem of Google having fired two of the researchers, not Bender, who is a professor, but Hamid Jabru and her colleague Margaret Mitchell, who at that time were the co-leads of the ethics division at Google. As if that wasn't bad enough, stochastic parrot became such an important term in the research community. But when it came up in the New York Times, came up on Twitter many times, people thought that Sam Altman had said it, that Gary Marcus had said it. It's like, no, these four female researchers were the ones who said it first.
Well, and it didn't take that much to find that information. That was pretty easy to locate. Wow. Okay. Well, and I actually appreciate you bringing that up, because I know in previous episodes, it's been a while that we've even talked about ethics boards basically kind of being dismantled at some of these companies. And I've always kind of wondered, I have my own cynical thoughts on that, but it's interesting to hear your kind of take on it, because it's actually kind of confirming some stuff that I kind of figured as much, that they just kind of don't want to deal with it because it complicates things really quickly, which is probably a big reason why Mike will love having you on the podcast, because it's a complicated sort of topic. And so we need to have disparate voices to see, well, what are we actually working with here? So I appreciate your points and you just being on the show. It's great. Not to speak of the Illinois stuff, although that's great as well. So,
the Illini is the main thing for Pat here. Right?
Yeah, it really kind of is. That's the thing. I can't tell you how excited I was because you know how you think about your undergraduate days and what have you, and you kind of develop those rose-colored glasses. It was tough being down there. I worked my butt off, but I did go back for a master's and finish that up in May. That I'm happy to have been. That I can say that I have a master's from there too. So there's a special place in my heart with that school. It has its problems, it has its issues, but I still think it's wonderful and great and all that. So, and NIU is quite good too. My sister went there, so no disses towards NIU. Go Huskies. All right.
I went to NIU and I have your same job. So there.
Oh my.
All right. So I wanted to ask you about like the impetus and the timeline and the context for creation of critical AI. I think you kind of just slightly explained your exigence for that. But maybe if you could go like maybe a more less technical answer, maybe like, exigence rhetorically means like the real reason you do something, right? So like you decided that because it was you that decided to do critical AI, right?
Yes, in dialogue with people that also shared my concerns, which was, there were a few concerns. I mean, one thing I want to make clear to your listeners, because this is not necessarily obvious, is that the critical in critical AI, with critical meaning many things, it has a lot of different usages in English. For us, is primarily critical in the sense of being able to use your own judgment and discernment, which is how the Greeks meant it when they used the word that now in philosophy circles is sometimes called critique with a QU in English, although with a K if you're German. And so that idea of critique, the use of judgment and discernment to make good decisions, to evaluate things in their context, to distinguish, implausible claims from strong ones. Mm-hmm. That's what's important to us. And because the term AI is itself so mysterious and vexed, and because the technology that AI consists of in actuality is so little known and understood, the ability for people to actually exercise judgment about it is really hard. And that's when we became interested in critical AI studies, in other words, research communities that would be very interdisciplinary and would talk about this from different vantage points, and in critical AI literacy for the general public. In other words, helping people, including teachers like yourselves, first and foremost among them, to actually be able to look at AI with a knowledgeable lens. But ultimately, all citizens should be able to do that, because if and to the extent that AI, as the industry wants to call it, becomes something that makes more and more of an impact on our society, people need to understand what it is and to know what they should be concerned about, what it's useful for, what it is not useful for.
Yeah, I think it was in the introduction to the first issue. I think you I don't know if that was co-written. I don't have it up in front of me, but I think you'd kind of gone over, or maybe it was the 4 C's. I can't remember. But someone was talking about how AI is kind of a misnomer and kind of grafted on from like the sci-fi, like kind of like we kind of have this real like, like data from Star Trek and HAL, which is like the Doomsday one, right? Like
also from U of I, by the way, just throwing that out there.
That's right.
I know. Look at
that. Yeah, that sounds like something that I did write in the intro. It's actually the editor's introduction to the journal, Critical AI. So not that your listeners necessarily care about this, but there are 2 critical AIs in my world: the Critical AI at Rutgers Initiative and Critical AI, the journal, which is published out of Rutgers by Duke Press. Okay. And what you're talking about is the inaugural essay, the inaugural introduction to the new journal. And it's called Humanities in the Loop, which is a pun on the industry term human in the loop. The industry talks about human in the loop when it when it is indicating that humans were involved somewhere in the pipeline of a new AI system being created, that humans were there at some point in the effort to make the system work better, to, as the industry likes to call it, align more with what it presumes humans actually want. So that's what human in the loop is. Humanities in the loop comes off of that because the humanities, which, as I know, I don't have to tell you, are the disciplines usually thought of as the most qualitative, the most involved in contextual knowledge, critical thinking skills, the understanding that there's not always like one single answer for some questions, that people may look at things differently, that not everything can be quantified, but also that all of those things emerge from what it means to be human. So here's an industry that claims to be building something that is approximating some kind of human-like ability to do X, Y, or Z, but has consulted humanists almost not at all. Some philosophers sometimes, but usually particular kinds of philosophers who work pretty closely to the problems that AI researchers are invested in anyway. So that's how you end up with something that claims to be good for teaching, but where were the teachers who gave their input? Where is the community? This is a common problem in the design and implementation of AI, so to speak, across domains. Not enough doctors or nurses or patients involved in the design of supposedly helpful medical systems. Not enough teachers involved or students involved in AI systems that are supposedly going to help to educate us. Not enough humanists involved in systems that are supposedly ethical or human-like or human-centered, responsible. The industry just churns out a lot of rhetoric about how hard it's trying to do all these great things, but is usually in dialogue with itself and about how it's implementing those things. And this is why there is so much AI hype. Not that everybody in the industry is bad. I work closely with people who are involved in commercial AI enterprise as well as academic research. So I am not at all someone who disrespects AI research or even the industry that is involved behind it. But what I am critical of is the way the industry is dominated by very, very large companies who really are not in dialogue with anybody except in a somewhat superficial way to lobby and to make nice. And boosters of it as well. They seem to dominate the hype cycles, so that we're hearing about AI through these multiple layers of hype, and it's so hard to cut through that and say, but you know what? Were people in the domain ever consulted? Did you even ask them?
Yeah. Professor, I really love everything you're saying. It actually draws my attention to, or reminds me of a scenario or situation. I remember telling Mike about this. It's probably about a year or two ago, because you're pointing to this idea that what we're referring to as AI or large language models. They weren't built with educators or education in mind whatsoever. That it has is that the companies that are making them have their own self-serving interests, which is understandable, but it also creates a lot of challenges for various disciplines outside of that particular one, and the consequences aren't necessarily positive. But where my mind went a little bit, it might sound kind of, I don't know, silly in some respects, but also like I felt like it seemed analogous. You'll see what I'm talking about. I was at a coffee shop, just doing some work, and I remember hearing this gentleman at a neighboring table, who was clearly from some tech company, and he's talking about some sort of application that need to be in schools. But the way he was talking about how schools had to accept it was really striking to me, because it sounded aggressive and it sounded completely devoid of any consideration for whether or not teachers, much less students, wanted, or even would benefit from having the application he was looking to push on these schools. And his demeanor. Now, granted, to your point, there are a lot of really great people in the tech field that are trying to do the right thing or kind of use it in very kind of, I think, ethical ways. However, there is absolutely going to be an element of people who are just out for a buck and out to kind of push their agenda without much consideration or care for the end user, or for people who maybe just don't even need the thing and can benefit or function just fine without it. Right? We live in a civilization or with a species that's never had this before, so we've been okay. Like, it's not like AI is like required. But I was really, really struck by just kind of it came across not just simply as aggressive, but just completely divorced from the very humanistic needs of the people that they're saying that they're going to be helping out. And that was alarming to me, because I was thinking, my gosh, how many other people are like this? This is just by happenstance that I'm hearing in a coffee shop. Mike kind of called me out. He's like, well, did you challenge him? Did you go up to him and say, are you an English teacher? And I regret that I didn't, but it was one of those things where I'm like, what do I even say to a guy like that? He just seemed like the type of person that just simply wanted to fight. And I'm like, wow. And I thought, gosh, I just need to be very discerning as an English teacher about what things I will allow, what I won't, because I know that there are people who are not necessarily acting in the best interest of my class, and educators themselves. And so I think it's a really good lesson for all of us to just say, hey, let's pause a little bit and let's think through these things and see, where is it helpful, where is it not, and not just simply just drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak.
Exactly. I mean, that attitude, with or without the aggressive bro tude that you sometimes get, like, you hate the future, that sort of thing. Why are you so afraid? It's like, why are you so afraid of answering my question? Like it with or without that attitude that, because a research community has come up with a commercial application for a specific technology, therefore it must be done.
Right.
It is in fact historically inaccurate. There are plenty of technologies that societies decided were not appropriate. And in the case of AI, I think that there are a lot of, I'm simply going to call it predictive analytics, because I want it to be very clear what I'm talking about. I think that predictive analytics can be a hugely beneficial technology for some things. And we'll see exactly how far it will get us in these areas. We don't want to predict in advance that they're necessarily going to work out. But for example, it looks as if there are really strong applications for cancer treatment, for designing drugs, for, hopefully tracking energy use and trying to make it more efficient. And so, right? Obviously, if you have a huge amount of data and you've obtained it ethically, and you know that the data is high quality data, and you put some smart people into the room who understand the domain that you want to train a system to make predictions about, you can do a lot of really good things. But this is not the provenance of the systems that we're talking about right now. When we're being told, well, of course, you're going to have your students using ChatGPT, which is going to deliver personalized education to them. And it will help them with the future. Because if you don't teach them that, you're hobbling them, et cetera, et cetera. And there are so many things that are wrong with that line of logic. Again, these people are not historical thinkers. They probably don't know much history, or if they do, they're not thinking about it. They're not applying its critical insights to their own wish list. So, for example, we have had calculators for a very long time, but we have not stopped teaching students how to do arithmetic.
Right. Yeah.
Because it is a basic building block for understanding. So the idea that you, as an English teacher, say in I would say even in 6th or 7th grade, all the way up to high school, the idea that like you're going to be teaching how to understand a literary text. What are you teaching right now?
I've got the things they carried. What do you have, Mike?
We're gearing up to do Slaughterhouse 5 and the Crying a Lot 49, but we haven't started either.
Okay. So let's say that you're teaching The Crying of Lot 49. The idea that the best way to teach that novel is to have your students engage in discussion with a chatbot.
I feel like the chatbot would be confused. It'd be like, we don't understand it either. I don't tell you.
Well, in actuality, it probably wouldn't, for the simple reason that the chatbot, it has an enormous amount of training data on Slaughterhouse 5.
Sure.
I'm sorry, we were talking about.
I was just being a little facetious. I'm sure that I'd get a lot of it right.
Well, it's not even that it would get it right. Again, let's go back to my remarks about bell curve thinking, right? Okay. So, let's say we're talking about Crying of Lot 49. So there's lots of schmoop and Cliff Notes and Wikipedia and a million academic essays and plenty of things that it's now becoming clear they shouldn't have been using as training data, but did, which is to say like paywall things that they just sort of got sources of. And, so all kinds of copyright violation and problems in that vein. But, so tremendous amount of training data on, basic plot points, but also like what other people have said.
Right.
So like, why is, The Crying of Lot 49 a postmodern novel, to give an example, like where, what is the conspiratorial thinking that it engenders in this postmodern way? I'm just like throwing this out there.
Yeah, right? You're on.
So, that prior to ChatGPT, that would be like a good discussion question for students. And it still, of course, is a good discussion question for that, but one that contributes to the sense that ChatGPT is some kind of genie or, genius technology, simply because it has modeled all that training data and can give you a strong-ish probable answer to that question, because it's what everybody sort of, or I should say what many people have begun their conversations about that novel with. So that, on a really, really good trial, ChatGPT sounds very similar to Wikipedia, but without the really good footnotes that Wikipedia insists upon, and without any acknowledgement of the fact that what is supposedly like some genius technology is actually working on the backs of thousands of people who wrote those Wikipedia articles and those schmoops and all of those things.
Well, and they're checking and double checking and making sure it's high quality, to your point, so that's not not getting a false information or trying to limit it, right? The other thing too that kind of comes to mind is that, and this is maybe shifting the conversation a little bit, so we can certainly go back. But as you're explaining that, that's also kind of like approaching or using ChatGPT from the standpoint of like, I need outputs to tell me what the story is about, as opposed to reading a story and experiencing it, as an individual human, right? That like, what is that experience of reading a lot 49 or the Crying a Lot 49 or Slaughterhouse 5? I mean, Slaughterhouse 5, I remember it's just disorienting. And that's part of that experience you need to feel. So if you go through and just say, hey, give me a quick summary or the notes for it, you're missing the complete experience. And it just seems kind of baffling to me. Like you can do that for songs, you can do that for movies and TV shows, which have you, but you don't, because you want to have that experience. And that's the same thing with reading. You want to go through and see, well, what's that world kind of be transported. And it just doesn't work when you get bulleted lists of like, here's what to think or what to know about the book.
Right.
Right. Exactly. And it's one step worse. I mean, we've all had the experience of teaching a novel or poem or story that we love, and getting the feeling, sometimes you can actually even see in a response paper, like, oh, there's the cliff note, little thing. And, maybe the person read the novel, but still went to cliff notes out of some sense of anxiety of, wanting to say a smart thing. There's not always bad intentions. I don't think that there's laziness always involved. Or maybe they didn't, maybe they just, but even the person who goes to cliff notes, even the person who reads Wikipedia knows where they got that information from. Whereas like the person who goes to a language model is getting a kind of a modeled synthesis of, what's out there on that topic with no attribution whatsoever. So that although technically speaking, language models don't plagiarize in the sense that they're not reproducing verbatim some language that appeared on some site, although in spite of the fact that technically that's not supposed to be the case, it happens. In a way, they're committing a worse form of plagiarism because they're saying all kinds of things without attributing whatsoever. Or when they do attribute, it's now through these kludges that bring together one model, the language model, with a search engine, and then you end up with those systems as with Bing and Google Bard, where you've got like the wrong citation for, or a made up citation. And, what it's really doing there, and this is a little bit hard to follow, is it's taking its own modeled output from training data and sticking it into the search engine and giving you an answer of where you might get that information, but it isn't where it got its information.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So
ChatGPT in the loop.
Yes, exactly. So like everything is mediated and biased. It's like what I like to think of these systems as is like summaries of summaries of summaries of summaries of summaries.
It's not plagiarism, it's paraphrasism.
I love that.
You're coining just words left and right.
I know, look at me go, right? I have English degrees. So let me ask you, I want to go back to, well, one, everything you just said, I think has been Pat and my experience, that about something you don't quite know what a kid knows, and that the book is the experience, and there's always kind of ways to circumvent that. It's just that like the AI stuff is going to be like way more, it's just so easy, right? But I kind of wanted to go back to the language, and about how no one wants to say stochastic parrot, and like kind of like the like critical AI, and even the word critical, like because we're so used to teaching high school kids that we talk about, when we talk about being like critical analysis, we're like, we're not going to like tear something apart, like we're not criticizing. They have to explain the word, right? Because you hear critical and people think it's like a pejorative, right? And I was thinking about critical AI, and like you're like, well, we mean this definition, right? This usage. And I was thinking like, okay, so critical AI and professors like you are kind of letting people know that there's more that we have to understand to use these systems. And then I think about the way that Silicon Valley markets, right? And so like I think one about like scooters, and about how 4 years ago or 5 years ago they just dumped scooters, right, in cities, and then people like took care of it, which is a weird thing that you would do. And that I also think about how, OpenAI is proprietary, like you have to pay to use the good model, but then they're going to suck up proprietary information that authors wrote. But and that's okay because they kind of posture that they're serving this kind of higher function. And then so I'm thinking about all that stuff, and I'm thinking about like I can never say the word.
Anthropomorphizing.
Right. And about how we do that to the AI system. And then your opening salvo about like how kind of AI is kind of misappropriated term from science. And then I think I go, okay, well, what do we do? Because when you think about language and rhetoric, they're good at getting people on board with their product, and part of it is by hooking us in emotionally, which is probably the anthropomorphizing of it, right? And so where does critical AI's role? Where like you pretty much admitted, like, the language that we're using is so our language, the language of people at universities, and it's very clear language if you understand it. But if you don't understand stochastic parrot, then you've lost, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, that particular article, which is extraordinary and worth teaching to your students, through some excerpts. Give me a second here. I've got.
I think I've got it. Is it on the dangers of stochastic parrots? Can language models be too big? I think that's the right one. I think I've got it right here. I'm assuming it's the correct one because it's got Bender and Emily Bender.
I think you found a summary by AI. I'm joking.
I mean, it's got
I'm joking.
Oh, well, it's like 14 pages, so it's not a summary, but it does have an abstract. That'd be weird if there was like a summary of the summary. But it's got Macmillan, Major, Schmitchell, and is it Gebru, something like that. I'm wondering if that's the same one. I don't know, Professor.
Yes,
did you catch that?
That is the paper.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Great.
Your students would not be able to read the paper easily because it is a technical paper. It was not intended for a mass audience. It was intended for other people in the natural language processing community. Right. And the typical person doesn't even know what natural language processing is.
I've learned that in the past year.
Could I be cheeky just a little bit? You're going to hate me for saying this. Could you take it and upload it to ChatGPT and get a quick little summary, or no?
I'm sure you could.
Okay.
And it might be a decent summary.
Yeah,
summary is one of the best things that these systems do, though they still, there's a randomness to what they will leave out, what will they decide is important. Again, they're always working on what, that they're premised on the idea that they're going to give you the most useful output according to, the criteria that were used when the model was designed. In reality, the world is a very complicated and messy place.
Yeah.
So the reason why you don't want to read a summary of even an article like that one is that the details that matter to you might be left out of the summary. The reason why you don't want to read a summary of The Crying of Lot 49 instead of The Crying of Lot 49 is that then you've missed the point completely, because that's a literary work, and the point is the impact on your life experience. You want to know what it feels like to be inside the paranoid world of that model, of that novel. Pardon me.
Sure.
Well, it is a model of a world, right? Like you enter, when you read a text, you enter into a brand new world unto itself.
That's really well said.
First virtual reality.
Yes.
We had a Professor Trudy Watt, who's a architect professor.
I was just thinking the same thing.
And we grabbed one of her scholarly articles, and we were showing her the PDF summarizer that was a plugin for ChatGPT, and we were like, "Hey, how accurate is this?" And she was like, Okay.
Well, she said it actually generally did a pretty good job, but to that point, and what you're speaking about, Professor, is it seemed to at points miss some of the nuance of what she was trying to say.
Right.
And so she's like, yeah, I mean, generally it kind of works, but there are some moments where it seems kind of maybe misread or
Yes.
misunderstand quite what she meant, which could be problematic. And I can see situations where, I mean, heck, you can think of legal situations that could be a significant problem.
Mhm.
In any event,
And as we know that, that's one of the many emerging sort of foibles. We know the story of the lawyer who used ChatGPT
Mhm.
for his legal research
yep.
and was humiliated. I do want to say, so there is an event that I would
Mhm.
like to publicize that I
Sure.
would love for your listeners to attend. It's on October 6th. It is called Critical AI Literacy in a Time of Chatbots, a public symposium for educators, writers, and citizens. And I'm pretty sure if you put that into a search engine, that you will end up at the Critical AI homepage for our events. But if for some reason you don't, perhaps I think you said you would put the events link. The events page has the registration link.
Yeah, we
And
will
it's
for sure put that in there.
So
okay.
just to
But
make sure, so under the it's criticalai.org, you can go there, correct? And then you can click on related events and it's listed there. Is that correct?
No,
No.
I can make sure that it is
Okay.
actually.
Okay.
CriticalAI.org is our blog.
Okay.
Complicated reason why we keep the blog separate from the Rutgers site. But
Okay.
and it may actually, now that I think about it, let me see. I think I foresaw
So
the desire. Yeah, if you land on criticalai.org, it actually says to register for
it
our
sure does.
10/6 virtual event, so yes. Let me
Yeah, that'd
stop
be
talking
easiest.
about these complicated instructions and say yes. At
Is that
both the
Prometheus
Rutgers
bringing?
landing page and the
yeah.
criticalai.org, you will end up in the right place.
Okay.
So I would love for your listeners, teachers. We will have teachers speaking, K through 12 teachers. We will also have uh, Brian Merchant, who is the tech columnist for the LA Times. He's being interviewed by award-winning poets and literary critics working on television because he's going to be talking about the Writers Guild of America strike and about Luddism, which is the subject of his book. We also have Amba Kak from the AI Now Institute, which is a great policy institute that talks about a lot of the problems, about the biases and harms, the bad environmental issues that are related to AI. They are at NYU. So without overwhelming you with all of the things that we hope to include on this day-long event, it would be great to see you and some of your listeners there. The event concludes with breakout sessions where people can just talk to each other.
Right. We'll have to see, because I think that's a Friday, and I think you're a public school teacher, like you're there from 7 to 4.
It will be archived.
Oh, so that might be a way to do it, but then you can't
that
be part of
that
the
and it's Eastern,
conversation.
Mike. So we're Central, so that gives us an hour.
It gives us an hour, right? But so anyway, so it's 10/6, October 6th. It's called Critical AI Literacy in a Time of Chatbots. It's free. If you're interested in AI, if you're just interested in AI and in any job, it would probably be worth checking out. I'd like to go. I'm just trying to figure out, like, yeah, it's a personal day, or I don't know stuff, but maybe the district.
It's unfortunately it's a week before we have conferences. So if it was the following week, we could go actually do it, but that's just neither here nor there.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe we can get the district to let us go. Maybe that'd be cool.
But I wanted to go back. I know we don't have that much time, so I want to go back to the thing that I think Pat was saying, or maybe both of you were saying it, which is that, so like, what do we do if to understand the stakes of this problem, You need to understand the word stochastic parrots, but you don't. Right? And, I do think that that's an important issue. And that's the kind of motivation that led to our creating this event. This is for the public. We need to give everybody the kind of literacy that they need to make decisions about what kind of AI that they support. And as you pointed out, ChatGPT is surveillant. They are going to be using all of your inputs for training data. They are in it for monetization. They're not there for the good of humanity, whatever else they may say about that. I mentioned earlier that these systems are extremely energy and water intensive. Not only their carbon footprint, but their water footprint is quite substantial. And that is because they're computation heavy. So like when you put a search term into a search engine and you land on Wikipedia, that uses much less energy, not to mention gets you to a more reliable result than if you put the same question into ChatGPT and it has to compute the answer for you, which is a computation heavy thing that involves much more computation in the server area where that is being stored. And therefore it needs, depending on the time of year, the particular server needs a lot more water to cool those in order to do that computation. So among other things, it's extremely inefficient. This is not by any means a green technology. In fact, it's hard to think of something less green that we want to be doing digitally. Why would we want to multiply our carbon footprint for asking simple questions?
Yeah, it's a ladder of abstraction type of thing. I think people get on their device and the device just works. And I think a lot of people think of ChatGPT as like, oh, I'm searching the internet, but it's easier. But you're not. It's a whole. It's like almost it's going into a gigantic database, right? And for years I've had to explain to kids like, okay, you're using something that looks like you're using the internet to get to a database, but the database is these.
It's not even a database. It's a model of a database.
Oh wow! Oh boy. Okay. Well, then we're back in pension land, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, though I completely love the Stochastic Parrots paper and do think that that teachers should read it and just pull some snips out to discuss with their students, because it's not intended for grade school kids.
Right.
The thing that might be appropriate to teach in your classrooms, it would be hard, but really rewarding for them, is Ted Chiang's article, Is ChatGPT a Blurry JPEG?
Oh yeah, I've read that.
Appeared in the New Yorker. I teach a lot of Chiang, and I'll mention too, because Emily Bender is so important in this sort of critical approach, that she and Ted Chiang are actually speaking together on a panel that has been put together in Seattle on November 9th. I think that's the right date. I might have that slightly wrong. Don't quote me on that actual date, but like you can probably find it. It's early November, and that is probably the kind of thing where showing that video or pieces of it to your students and then having a discussion about what they're saying in conjunction with some snips from Stochastic Parrots and maybe a prior reading of the Ted Chiang article and maybe one of his great stories. I teach the life cycle of software objects, which is a novella that is really fun to teach.
Not heard of that. I have so many other questions, but I think we're coming up here pretty much on like about 50 minutes probably. Which in our experience is about as long as people can pay attention, right? unless you're super bored.
We're locked in. But
Yeah. Well, this has been such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
It really has been.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. There's been I don't even know if I can summarize this one because it got so in depth. So I'm not going to try.
Well, it's funny, Mike. You're having a hard time. Your screen's actually frozen. That's how I know you're really thinking hard over there. But we can.
Yeah, I crashed again. So anyway, with the crashing, Professor Goodlad, you've managed to crash my computer. So appreciate that. Thank you for coming. I
have that effect on people too. Like they're just sort of like, I don't want to deal with that.
Mind melt. This is brilliant though. This is really, really good stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I'll come back in 6 months if you have follow-up questions that you want to ask.
For sure.
We'd love it. We'd love it.
But I would love, I particularly like where we landed. There's so many great people out there that are doing this work, and the idea of teachers just sort of engaging work that is a little bit too difficult for the students, but bringing it into the classroom in some way. But the other fun thing is that the DAIR Institute, DAIR, which is founded by Timnit Gebru, the same Timnit Gebru fired by Google, and co-author of the Stochastic Parrots paper. That institute is now doing a mystery hype AI theater set of events with Emily and Alex Hanna, and they go over a few weeks of sort of AI hype and debunk it in a very fun, kind of atmosphere.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll try to link everything that we can. Right. And we would love to have you back on the show for sure. And
all right. You take care.
You for your time.
Say hi to all my friends in Illinois.
Will do.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Oh man, what a show. Distinguished Professor Dr. Lauren Goodlad out of Rutgers and also Critical AI. I want to underscore and highlight the Critical AI Literacy in a Time of Chatbots public symposium for educators, writers, and citizens. She's putting that together. It's free. You can register at their site. There's so many links, so many references in this program to all the different journals, stories, essays, articles, whatever. I linked everything on our RSS webpage. I'm not so sure in the show notes if that stuff shows up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but if you look for the Bot Brothers on RSS, you can find all that for your ease. There's also the usual links to get hold of Pat or I. There's the Twitter also, and there's Pat's Facebook group. There's also a form to contact us to ask a question or maybe ask us to do something on a show. We have got some responses for that, and we're working on that. So, boy, I hope Goodlad can come back. Have a great week. Watch out for the AI and have fun with it too. Bye-bye.